So Verizon just paid $100 million to settle a lawsuit over hidden fees on customer bills. They call them administrative charges, and these were fees that customers didn't understand and weren't clearly told about. So when I read the story, my first reaction was, of course they did, because I see the exact same thing inside corporate WAN, internet, and voice bills every single week. And this isn't just a consumer story, this is your company's story too. And so what was the settlement about? So Verizon charged postpaid wireless customers administrative fees and telco recovery fees for years. And this was from 2016 to 2023. And the court found these presented as if they were government-related charges, but they weren't. And they were actually internal revenue generating charges that Verizon could adjust whenever they wanted to. And so it turned out that individual customers are supposed to get anywhere from $15 to $100 back. So it adds up. We'll see how much people really get back. People are already complaining about how much they get back. Obviously, it was a big win for the law firm, and not surprisingly, Verizon denied wrongdoing, but they paid the $100 million. So I think the key part was that the customers didn't understand and weren't clearly told about these fees. They thought that they were being charged a fixed price for moving over to Verizon. They didn't realize that there were additional charges, which were not true taxes, which they were going to be charged on their bill. So that was what the contention was, and Verizon thought it was worth handing over $100 million instead of going to court and going any deeper into it, because probably because they thought it was going to be hard to defend, even if they were technically legally correct. So, this phrase about not really being understanding the charges and weren't being clearly told about them, this can happen to a lot of line items in large enterprise telecom bills. And we're not just talking about wireless here, we're talking also about landlines. So, if you're in charge of enterprise spending, this is why this type of thing could be your problem too, is, the consumer version was, a few dollars a month per device, but, if you have hundreds of devices, then that adds up. But you can also see, if you have AT&T and Verizon and Lumen, and you have a WAN or internet services or voice services, you can end up with hundreds of line items if you're spending $500,000 a year or millions of dollars a year. And it's really hard to validate what every single one of these charges are and if they're valid. And so unfortunately, vendors do know this, so they don't really like to volunteer when you're paying for something you don't have to pay for. And often they don't always disclose all these additional charges on your bill. So some of the charges you know about, but some of them you don't until you get the bill. And then there are these additional charges which weren't always taken into account when calculating total cost of ownership on your new contract. So this can really add up, both as we saw on the consumer side, but also in enterprise billing. And you may have noticed in a lot of bills, taxes and surcharges can be anywhere from 20 to 50% of the bill, depending on what you're buying. And a lot of these fees do seem to keep going up. And the good news is these things can be negotiated, but there is also a limit. But it's also important to know who's charging what, because depending on who the vendor is, they will charge different amounts. And so, that $3 a month fee, which Verizon Wireless doesn't tell you about, well, if one of their competitors isn't charging it, then that really decreases the total cost of ownership. So you really want to have full disclosure of everything. And you also want to take a look and see, well, what are all these charges? Ask competing vendors, do I have to still pay them if I work with you? Use that information when you're negotiating against your incumbent vendor. And these are a lot of the things we help with. So, and then in addition to that, it just shows the importance of looking at details as well. I mean, we see all the times that, vendors won't tell you about services that, were disconnected but never removed from billing, or things you're not really using anymore. They often won't be very clear about it. Sometimes you have to grab a couple of different reports and crunch a bunch of numbers to identify what you don't really need. Sometimes, they are willing to tell you if you ask them, and that can be a good start. Just ask them, hey, there are things here which I'm paying for, which I don't need anymore. But yeah, definitely look out for those administrative and recovery type fees, and definitely make sure that your pricing, which you negotiated, ends up, and the total cost of ownership you assumed you were going to get when you signed up a contract, make sure that's actually what you get on the invoice, and figure out, where were those differences. And another fun thing is too, let's say you have minimum annual revenue commitments and you're locked into those. So, you could be thinking, oh, I have to spend, $500,000 a year with, Verizon. Well, does Verizon or AT&T or Lumen did they actually include all these regulatory charges, all these taxes? Did they include some of them, some not? When deciding whether or not you made your commitment, you really want to find that out. Are they gonna charge you for, let's say there are a bunch of billing errors and you thought you hit your numbers, but then they have to refund you a bunch of money? Is that gonna mean that you now didn't make your commitment, so they now get that money back? You have to get all these things in writing before you sign a contract. And again, I'll try to put a link in the description to our overview, and then you can, this is an overview about how to deal with telecom contracts, and we have a lot of details of things to look out for. So I'll try to include that here. I think we have another video as well. And so yeah, it's just a really good thing to know, to look out for these things. And you know, Verizon settlement was like really clear. They knew about these fees. They weren't a mistake. They were designed. They knew they could pump up these fees. I saw a similar thing with another client with a small phone company you probably haven't heard of, but what they did is originally the client had all these toll-free charges. They were charging them $1 a month initially, then it went up to $5, then like probably 7 something, then it went up to $10, and who knows where it will go next. But so what turned out to be initially a small charge years ago ballooned 10 times over time. So these are the things you have to look out for, because those charges weren't fixed in stone. You would have thought that they'd keep the same charges, but there are a lot of charges which the vendors give themselves the flexibility to increase over time to pad their own revenue. And a lot of people don't realize that that's what's happening. So really good to know. Vendors do know about these fees. The sales reps usually don't know about them, but the billing people, the people who create the bills and manage that side of the business understand, the finance guys understand that. And they don't really have a big incentive to get rid of all that extra unnecessary charges, which you don't need. And also, of course, your account rep's going to be measured on revenue retention and contract renewals, and not really on finding all the savings. So they're there to sell you product and help you make sure you get a good experience with the product, make sure the product works. But it's not really their job to. Really, their job is to get you to sign a contract at the end of the day. So they can be really helpful, but don't expect them to. They're kind of going to see it as they have their job to do, and they're not necessarily there to do your job, which is to make sure you're buying what you need and make sure you're not buying things unnecessarily. So yeah, but definitely bring these things up with the rep so you can get some help, give them some ammunition to go to their bosses that can help with new contracts. And of course, the complexity of these bills, right? That's an advantage for the vendors. It's harder to read. It's less likely you'll challenge anything. And so it's really good to go over these things with a fine-tooth comb. That's one of the things which we help with as well. So I'm Anders Mikkelsen with Berlin Pacific, and I'm definitely here to help you with all those things. So please feel free to reach out to me, and I hope I can help you guys with this. Take care.